Lyxe finally stepped ashore of the city before her, surprised by just how mechanical everything looked. Is this truly how these people live? She sighed softly to herself, looking down at what seemed to her to be bleak, lifeless buildings. This isn't what I imagined human life would be like at all. Ryung had told her about human civilizations before, but it was very different from these stories. And she wondered why she hadn't seen a single human until now. She had known that people were smaller, but had no idea how extremely gigantic she really was in comparison to humans. As she trudged through the harbor, masses of water rained down from her body onto the crowds of people at her feet. She considered what she should do for a few moments, wondering if it would be right to destroy the box buildings that stood before her. A part of her felt that there was nothing to truly lose. In a sense, the humans seemed to be using the area for little more than automation of their day-to-day lives, likely having destroyed countless trees and other wildlife to attain their selfish goals and needs. Ryung would have no qualms about destroying a city like this, she thought to herself, still trying to justify her feelings. A part of her wanted to show the humans the errors of their ways, showing them that the world could be used for so much more than just automation and whatever else they seemed to be using it for. Finally, she gave in to her desires. She started fairly small, at least. What she considered to be small, destroying the occasional building that seemed to be empty to her, and slowly not paying anywhere near as much attention to where she was walking. No one knew exactly how to react. Some people screamed in terror as they ran, hoping to potentially find cover somewhere, anywhere, that they may potentially be safe. The few that remained stood idly by, too paralyzed by their fear to do anything but watch as the Titaness slowly approached them. The dark clouds in the surrounding area did little to assist the foreboding atmosphere, simply adding to the anxiety and fear that the townspeople felt. They watched terrified as the woman, seemingly an axolotl, slowly approached them. A look on her face that the bystanders could only describe as pure malice. With each passing second, the screams of the few people that managed to run echoed throughout the streets. The axolotl-like creature made her way through the streets, her feet crashing harshly against the ground beneath her, crushing the occasional innocent bystander beneath her massive foot with each step. Lyxe was blissfully unaware of all of the mayhem she was causing across the town. She still to this point had assumed that the city was likely just an automated factory. Little more, so she felt little to no remorse for destroying portions of the city. She even thought that the humans would see it as them doing her a favor, believing she was doing something that would serve to benefit them. Whilst she was exploring, however, she noticed that the humans seemed to be sending what appeared to her to be small insects after her. Come on, she sighed softly to herself, can't these humans see that I'm doing them a favor? Without any hesitation, she crushed one of the helicopters with her hands. I don't know what these things are, she sighed to herself, but these humans need to get this area back in check. Damn it, the man said to himself. Why are missiles doing nothing to this? This beast. He was far too concerned with trying to mow Lyxe down to notice that her hands were closing in on him before it was all too late, leaving him unable to escape from the giantess' grasp. As the light slowly faded from the surrounding area, he realized just what was going on, and what was going to happen to him. He tried his best to plead with the axolotl standing in front of him, not caring if she couldn't hear, or even understand a word he said. His screams were quickly cut out as Lyxe's hands clapped against the helicopter, crushing his body in an instant. Lyxe rubbed her hands and the shattered wreckage fell to the ground in pieces. To his surprise, the man piloting the helicopter came back to shortly thereafter on the ground beneath where he was flying. His helicopter was still destroyed, just as he had expected it to be, but his body was perfectly intact. There was, of course, a sharp pain. But it was a small price to pay for his life seemingly being spared. He looked up at Lyxe and examined her body. Everything seemed just as he had expected. The giant axolotl looked exactly as he remembered from before he seemingly died. Though he hadn't noticed it initially, she seemed to have a futuristic bracelet around her wrist, leading him to wonder if she perhaps had something to do with his reawakening of sorts, or if it was mere coincidence. Lyxe looked around at the city before her, admiring her handiwork. She had destroyed quite a few of the buildings already, just as she had hoped, having crushed a good amount with her feet and tail, but there was something that she couldn't quite explain. On the ground beneath her, she saw what looked like moving dots, perhaps nanodrones? She of course still believed the city to be fully automated, so it made sense to her that they would have drones doing nearly everything for them. After considering it for a few moments, she decided to test her theory and destroyed one of the skyscraper walls with her tail. It came crashing down within moments of her swing, followed by screams that barely pierced her ears. Lyxe looked inside to see if there were any machines, as she had expected. Inside the skyscraper, however, there seemed to be countless other tiny dots, some huddled together, others facing away from Lyxe. She bent down to get a closer look, which elicited screams of terror from the small residents inside of the skyscraper. It took her a few moments to process just what she was looking at, but it finally hit her. The people inside the skyscraper looked similar to Ryung, significantly smaller, of course, but similar nevertheless. Who humans? She thought to herself. She wasn't sure if her voice would have any impact on them this up close, so she didn't want to take any chances by speaking aloud. Her eyes darted across the building as she realized what she might have done. From inside of the skyscraper, the people looked on in fear. Most of them were too afraid to so much as make eye contact with the Axolotl-Kaiju, likely afraid that she may harm them, not yet knowing that she had good intentions. Lyxe knelt back up from the skyscraper, still trying to process the situation she found herself in. If these were truly humans, then she had to wonder if what she stepped on to this point weren't actually bots. But rather. She hesitantly lifted one of her feet, afraid of what she might find, just as she expected. It seems she had stepped on a great deal of the tiny humans. She let out a soft sigh as she looked over the countless bodies over her feet, but quickly realized that they were still moving. Are they still alive? She thought to herself, surprised that her bracelet managed to save the lives of such small life forms. She knew of course that it would protect her, seeing as she had managed to survive the myriad of minuscule attacks that she now came to realize the humans seemed to have launched against her, but she never expected it to protect the humans as well. Of course, this was perfect. She could continue her exploration without any concern. Even though it was an odd feeling knowing that she was literally trampling on a lot of people. Still, she couldn't help being curious. The bracelet showed the number of protected life forms at all times, mostly to give the wearer an idea of how much destruction they had caused, all the while alleviating them of any potential guilt. She looked down at the number slightly nervously, and was surprised to see it sitting at just over 5,000 already. Though she was hesitant to do so at first, Lyxe slowly and carefully sat down to the ground, taking the humans off of her feet as best as she could manage. It was an arduous task, for sure, with the insane number of people stuck to her soles, but she felt it was necessary. Although the humans were all stuck to her feet, they had all survived, just as she had hoped. On the harbor, Nova and Nolder were slowly coming to in a deep footprint. Nolder was still sitting beside his granddaughter Nova, just as he last remembered. He looked around nervously, hoping that what had happened was all but a dream. But the giant axolotl still rampaging around the city, along with the destruction she had already caused, quickly proved to him it was an unfortunate reality. Once he realized just what was happening, he looked over toward Nova. Please, Nova, he thought to himself, please be all right. He gently shook Nova awake, and within a few moments, the girl regained consciousness. Giara Grandpa? Nolder smiled at her and nodded. Are you all right, dear? He said, his voice still slightly shaky. I am, Nova replied. I don't quite understand it, but... Are we still alive? She pinched herself, eliciting a soft laugh from Nolder. It seems to be the case, he said. It was strange to them both, the street around them was all but decimated, and the buildings had been all but decimated, and they have been stomped on by a giant kaiju monster, so how would they survive? As Nova looked around, her eyes caught the giant axolotl that had put them in this position in the first place. While she knew others may feel it, she didn't harbor any animosity towards the creature. She believed that it might actually be a sentient being, and couldn't shake the feeling that they had no ill intentions. Grandpa, she said, slowly lifting her body off of the ground, can you walk? Nova extended a hand toward Nolder with a smile on her face. He was hesitant at first but grabbed her hand, getting back onto the ground with no issue. He said, I suppose I can. Nova was glad. And, without any hesitation, asked him to follow her. The two walked around the city for what felt like forever. The occasional scream still echoed throughout the air, though it was much further from where they were at this point. The destruction of the city was worse than Nolder had anticipated. Buildings all around the city were destroyed, with people running around the city, seemingly looking for their loved ones. Eventually, Nova broke the silence. Grandpa, she said, I want to speak to the creature. It probably doesn't speak our language, she chuckled softly, but I think you might be able to help if you'd be willing. I don't believe they have bad intentions, everyone seems to be safe. No, he was naturally reluctant. On the one hand, he couldn't help feeling nervous. He would have no hopes of surviving if whatever saved them the first time could be turned off at will if they said the wrong thing. Still, it seemed he and Nova weren't just a special case. As they continued their trek through the city, he took note of the people on the ground. At first, he believed some of them may have been dead, until he saw one of them moving and slowly getting up onto their feet. He grabbed Nova and ran over to them, helping them off of the ground. Are you okay? He asked, putting a hand on their shoulder. The young woman finally looked up at Nolder, a look of deep confusion on her face. I am. But. She looked around, seemingly trying to process everything that had happened. I don't know how I'm okay. I remember being stepped on, but. Nolder gently rubbed the back of her head and smiled. Don't worry, he said, you'll be fine. Just get somewhere safe. The woman nodded and walked off as best as she could manage, using one of the nearby buildings for support. Nova smiled at Nolder and nodded. See? She said. I had a feeling they didn't mean any harm. And if we weren't the only ones to survive. Nolder looked forward to the rest of the street, taking note of countless other people lying on the ground. It took some further convincing from Nova, but he eventually caved. Fine, he said. But if there are any signs of potential issues, we're going to have to stop. Okay? Nova nodded, smiling at Nolder. I knew you'd agree to help, she said happily, looking forward to the city. At the very least, she said, we have a rough idea of where she's heading. The two followed the path of Lyxe's destruction, hoping they'd be able to figure out just what was going on. And for the other people that were put into this situation alongside us. Nolder looked around the slight wreckage of the city, letting out a soft sigh. I suppose we don't have much of a choice. Nova looked over towards Nolder, slightly confused. Just what do you have in mind? She asked. Nolder paused for a few moments and eventually smiled. Let's help them out along the way, he finally said. They may be just as scared and confused as she was. Even if we don't fully understand what's going on yet ourselves. Nova excitedly agreed, running up to a large group of people and helping them off of the ground. Though Nolder was hesitant at first, he felt they may need as many people on their side, so to speak, as possible. Unbeknownst to everyone, the military had plans to eradicate Lyxe from the world, to prevent any further destruction from the massive axolotl. They didn't know if it would work, of course, but they felt there was no other choice but to try. More troops were sent to follow Lyxe, alongside a battleship equipped with a weapon that was still in the prototype stages of development. Unfortunately, however, they hadn't taken into consideration the potential repercussions of using the weapon earlier than it was meant to be used. It didn't take much convincing for the higher-ups to use it, of course, but it was likely to culminate in far more risks than should have truly been taken. Meanwhile, in the city, now fully aware of what the small dots were, Lyxe couldn't help feeling guilty for the destruction and mayhem she had caused. She slowly lowered her body down to the ground, looking over the destruction and mayhem she had caused. She wanted little more than to explain herself, to tell them that she truly had no ill intentions, but her pleas were doing nothing more than terrifying them all the more. She hadn't considered it at the time, but her voice was too much for the frail human bodies to cope with. The sheer force of her voice blew them off of their feet, sending some of them flying into the buildings behind them. The few that were still standing chanted something at her as they ran, though she couldn't quite figure out what it was. Lyxe felt defeated. She felt there was nothing for her to do, no way for her to resolve the situation at hand. No matter what she tried, all of the humans ran from her, seemingly terrified for their lives. She couldn't hurt them, of course, even if she wanted to, she wouldn't be able to. Of course, they had no way of knowing this, making it all the more difficult for her to communicate with them. After helping countless people on the streets, Nova and Nolder slowly approached the giant axolotl, their hearts nearly beating out of their chests. Nolder had already managed to record some of what Lyxe said whilst they slowly approached, but he wasn't able to pick up everything, the translation software only translating a few words properly. As Nolder fiddled around with the machine, Nova stared deep into the axolotl's eyes. She wasn't sure just what it was, but something about her seemed absolutely endearing. She couldn't take her eyes off of her, even if only for a moment. She wanted to say something, to try and explain the feelings that she was experiencing, but she knew it wouldn't be possible to communicate directly. In a last-ditch effort, Nova waved up at the axolotl, unsure if it would be recognized as a sign of greeting. Lyxe smiled back at Nova and slowly lowered her body down to greet the two humans, surprised that any of them would even come this close to her in the first place. The others seemed terrified of her, and while she understood to an extent, she couldn't help feeling saddened by it, until these two humans approached her. Within seconds, Lyxe's face was directly in front of Nova's. It seemed even the axolotl's eyes were bigger than her whole body, and, without thinking, she leaned forward to gently rub the scaly skin of the axolotl, with Lyxe letting out a soft chuckle. "That tickles, you know," she whispered, hoping her voice would be soft enough to not blow them away as she had the other humans. Nova was trembling all over and almost peed in fear when the giantess opened her huge mouth in front of her, revealing long sharp teeth, only to whisper something in a booming but at the same time gentle voice. Nova tried to calm down. She had only tickled the giant monster girl. Apparently she wasn't upset, so everything seemed to be alright. She had to gather all her courage to answer the giantess. This was part 2 of the story, Attack on Baywa City. This part of the story was written by Zentiano, also known as Valentine. We hope you've enjoyed the story so far. For more stories featuring Lyxe, the giant Axolotl-Kaiju, and other characters, please subscribe to our channel. Also check out our main channel for videos featuring the gentle mega giantess Ryung. Of course, we are happy about a like and comments, and if you want to support our work and help us to produce more videos or stories, check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening.